So today, as Mina mentioned, we're going to talk about product marketing. Product marketing for me is something that is actually really important in my experience because people usually see this as more as a cost center or like doesn't really provide revenue. But in my experience, product marketing done right is really has a significant impact on your company and acts really as a force multiplier in your organization. Mainly because they'll be able to find like new revenue channel by looking at the market, for example, optimizing your conversion funnel by providing mapping user journey, mapping content to that user journey, for example, and also understanding what feature to build in your product to win the market by listening to what's going on in the market and getting customer feedback. And obviously, at the end of the day, it's about revenue, and they will empower the sales team to close more deals, bigger deals, faster deals. So before we jump into this with our panelists, let's quickly intro ourselves. So I'll start. So I'm Sylvain. I'm the CEO of Pusher. Pusher's been around for a long time. For people that don't know, we provide developers APIs to developers, to enable them to build real-time features into the application, like chat, in-app notification, activity feed. And so I just recently relocated to the Bay Area. So if anybody has food recommendation, activity recommendation for me, please talk to me after the session. And so now I will let the panelists to introduce themselves. So maybe we can start left to right. So Ursula, you can start.
Hey everyone, I'm Ursula Aroot. I actually work for myself. I run a small marketing agency that helps startups and mid-sized companies with their marketing. So we do three things. We help companies with their messaging and positioning, their demand gen and content, and finally their B2B strategy.
That's great. Indy?
Great. Good evening, everyone. My name is Indy Sen. I'm a product marketer over at Google Cloud, our enterprise-facing business. I work specifically on G Suite, which is our collaboration and productivity platform, and I market specifically to the developer audience, so developers and partners to get them to build integrations and add-ons and custom applications on the G Suite platform.
All right, thank you. I'm Asta Malik, and I'm the head of product and platform marketing at Zendesk, and I recently inherited the sales enablement team as well, so doing a bunch of things at a very high growth, intense, and a fun environment.
That's great. We'll talk about sales enablement later on, so we can definitely talk about that with you. But I thought for tonight, we could start with essentially looking at like the differences between product marketing and developer evangelist and community marketing, because that's usually where dev tool company starts. And I would love to hear your thoughts on that. So maybe Indy, you have a background doing these things. So tell us a bit like the difference between the roles.
Yeah, happy to. So so some of the background I have. So before Google, I was I headed up developer relations and marketing over at MuleSoft, and then I also kind of dabbled, and I've always done some of this platform developer-facing things at other companies, including Box and Salesforce. So I've been both in the shoes of community manager, developer evangelist, or certainly worked with them. I would say there are a couple differences. I think to me, community managers are obviously very a first line of defense with like developers. Like they'll be the voice of your organization and almost like the brand, right, from a cultural and ambassadorship standpoint. Where I see the overlap with product marketing specifically is that I think product marketing can be at its core like the messaging arm of like what that organization is going to do. So if you think about it, product marketing might like create the content or like the main strand of messaging, and then folks like community managers or developer evangelists will be the ones sort of like spreading that message through the appropriate channels. So I think that would be the major handshake that comes to mind, is that product marketing sort of like creates and or at least provides some of the direction, the backbone, either from a structural standpoint or a messaging standpoint, and then community managers and evangelists are the ones who like execute out in the field and leverage that messaging.
Okay. What about you, Ursula? Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, so when I worked at Pantheon for 2 years. It's a website platform for Drupal and WordPress websites. And we actually, developer evangelism was a big thing for us because we had an open source community. So we probably went to over 100 different meetups. And I think when you think about developer evangelism, it's always all about the meetups. So, but it was the responsibility of the marketing team, and within the marketing team, the larger marketing team, to actually tell the developer evangelists what was on offer, what were the products they needed to promote, give them the t-shirts, etc., and all those fun things, and what the demo was. And I think the big thing is with developer evangelism, specifically around product marketing, is how do you measure it? And so we worked very closely as a marketing team to really measure those results, to have them tie into product development.
Okay. Both of you mentioned brand. Like, do you think that brand sits within the product marketing organization, or is that something owned by someone else? Like, what's the relationship with brand?
Well, if you think about a marketing organization, right, you've got the CMO or VP of marketing at the top level, and then in a mature company, let's say you've got 10 employees, I would think the head of marketing usually typically owns brand. In a larger company, it's probably corporate communications, probably similar at Zendesk.
We have a very different structure. I'm happy to talk about that.
Okay. For smaller companies, you've got product marketing, then you've got your demand gen team, then you've got your developer evangelism, then you've got marketing operations, and then you've got your web team. So brand kind of sits in within everyone's purview, but it's run by the head of marketing specifically and the CEO.
Okay. And what about at Zendesk?
Yeah, so I think Zendesk is pretty unique. I would agree with Ursula that, for the most part, I think in all the companies that I've worked in the past, brand sits within marketing, typically under corporate marketing. In very small organizations, like you said, it becomes a responsibility of product marketing. But at Zendesk, for those of you who've seen our brand and maybe the evolution over the last 10 years or so, we have a very, very strong and a very unique identity, right? We're this quirky, fun brand, and very, very specific about the ethos that we want to communicate around simplicity and also sort of like very user-centric messaging. So from the very beginning, our chief creative officer has reported into our CEO directly, and that's still the case. And I think in a way that's helped us retain that brand identity while evolving it, of course, to meet the growing needs of the company as we scaled. But that's the structure at Zendesk. And we went through a recent messaging refresh exercise, which my team led, but it was in close collaboration with the brand team, because I think it's important that when you're sending out new messages to the market, when you're positioning yourselves differently, you are sort of like looking at the entire picture of like how the brand comes across to people, both prospects and customers. So it's definitely a very close partnership between the two teams.
Okay, cool. On that front, like staying at that kind of like more general level, can you tell me a bit kind of like the biggest mistake you made around like product marketing? What was it and what did you learn from it? And if someone wants to tackle this one.
Sure, I can. So I think
there's so many.
So many, exactly. Right? Like let's come up with something that's not too sad or tragic. Right? But I think it all. So in product marketing, especially if you think about what we were echoing in terms of like when you're helping set the structure and the direction of like what types of activities are you going to focus on, right? Especially at smaller companies. There's tons of bets you're going to place, right? There are things you can do from an awareness standpoint, like, ads, like, you can do like webs, you can use things like, like Optimizely, conduct like experiments, because you own that, right? When I was at MuleSoft, I kind of thought of myself as sort of like more of like a full stack marketer, that was responsible for everything that was developer facing, for awareness, consideration, all the way to adoption. And I would say one example that I had in terms of a lesson that I learned was that, I think strategy does not always travel. And what I mean by that is that you may have had knocked it out of the park with like a specific like event and like a template, a playbook that you had at a company like a Salesforce or at a Box, and then you try to like take it over to your other company and you execute the same playbook. It's not going to always work out, right? And I think the main reason why it doesn't work out is sometimes that every developer is different. Obviously, your product is different. Where you are in your cycle as a company is also different. So one example that I learned from was I tried to execute a very similar play that I had when I was at Box, where the idea was we grafted onto like a bigger event like Google I/O actually, and at the time we were marketing this ecosystem of applications called One Cloud, which is basically all these applications that integrated with Box as a file system. And we had just launched the Android version of the ecosystem. So we had this awesome party just down, couple blocks down over at the Cartoon Art Museum during Google I/O. And developers just showed up in droves. Like, we kind of did a little bit of word of mouth, but then, did some marketing, and then through word of mouth, we just, all of a sudden, all these people with I/O badges just showed up. And it was a great event, Fast forward to a couple years afterwards, we were trying to do something, again, very high touch and high quality with our developers for MuleSoft. And I kind of, since we were in the city, and I kind of said, hey, why don't we try this? Like this venue, the Cartoon Art Museum, developers love it. It was really cool, and we tried to do it. And we had our founder Ross Mason come and speak with us. And but basically, I think the big difference was that the demographic was different. Like a MuleSoft developer, MuleSoft is an enterprise integration platform. they probably skew on a little bit older. You know, they've been doing enterprise integration. They've used probably like tools that that probably give them PTSD to this day, right? And you know, they probably, you know, most of them live like they work for bigger companies. So there was not like the same you know, demographic, and it wasn't probably the same even like type of developer. So a party in the middle of the week where, you know, they were meant to go away and take some time off, or not, you know, potentially not be able to like pick up their kids or that kind of stuff, or have to deal with that, was not as didn't quite work as well as the one we had for Box with the younger developers.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's definitely something that happens. Like you said, Playbook doesn't travel really well across the organization.
Exactly.
So looking on the launch, like Mina mentioned launch as a part of the topic, what are the different type of launches that you dealt with as part of the programming function? Like Ashta, you have a big suite of product now under your umbrella. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I think product launches are product launches. You can basically tier them. My team manages 7 different product lines now. And you know, when you tier them, you can imagine that, you know, maybe it's a brand new product that you're introducing that requires a different kind of effort. If it's just a feature update, it requires a different kind of effort. So we have sort of like, you know, come up with a structure that helps us sort of like, you know, just organize the different type of launches that we roll out at Zendesk. But, you know, one thing that is critical to any product launch success, and, you know, you talked about templates, it kind of goes back to playbooks and templates that we've all used in different companies, and we try and repeat them in different places. I think it's good to remind yourself that when you re-engineer your product, you have to re-engineer the conversation. And for that, you have to go back and look at the people that you're going to sell this to. So instead of focusing on just, you know, what's new in the product, or if it's a new product, what are the features going to do, you have to focus on the storytelling. And the storytelling only works if you know your people. So I think this is one of the mistakes a lot of product marketers make as well, like not investing enough time in understanding the personas that they're going to target. And, you know, we operate in an attention economy. So, you know, in this economy, it's not so much about, you know, technology being the barrier to entry or technology being the barrier to success, but it's actually storytelling and, you know, relaying a message. And, you know, brand becomes sort of like a memory game, right? So do people recognize what you do? Do they really understand what the company and their products stand for and the value it delivers? So to me, you know, product launches are not about, okay, we've released a bunch of things and like, what do each of these features do? That's great. Those descriptions are very important. But focusing on the jobs to be done, focusing on, you know, how they're going to sell and solve some problems for the customers is important.
Okay.
And I think one orientation that always helps is like, most of the companies here, I know there are many B2C too, but majority of the companies here are like B2B companies. So keeping that orientation, at the end of the day, you're selling it to people. And having that B2C mindset in a B2B environment really helps to succeed with products and launches. So I think that's a key to sort of like, you know, keeping in mind.
Yes.
Yeah, one thing to add, like be very clear up front with your leadership team, like what are the metrics for success? So why are you launching this product? Is it for awareness? Great. So what are the metrics for awareness? Is it for usage? What are the awareness for usage? Is it conversion? What are the metrics for conversion, et cetera? And just to dovetail on your message around storytelling, I think if you can't figure out what your key differentiation points with your product, then don't create a product launch or don't go out to market if you're not clear with what your differentiators are. Recently, I was working with a client and we just couldn't get to the differentiation. And I think we realized that they wanted to create this product because a competitor had it, but yet they still didn't have the right differentiation. So really think about your messaging tree, your positioning, and why you're doing it.
If I could just quickly add to that, I think just to piggyback on what Ursula was saying is I think you know, when you're considering a launch, you know, at Google we have different stages. We have what we now call alphas, betas, and then GA, generally available. And sometimes we will use the alpha and the beta as interim stage gates where we do work not only on like the minimum viable product, but also what I would call the minimum viable positioning, right? Because there's so much input that you'll get from like some of the smaller cadre of like developers that'll influence your ultimate messaging. And then the second thing I'll say, just to piggyback on the metrics, is that the way we think about it when we do launches, and relatively recently, so this happened maybe about a year ago, but a lot of times, you know, given our consumer heritage, where we just you know, blog something and people are like, oh, let's try it, it's from Google, it's great, you know. In the enterprise, and specifically to enterprise developers, it doesn't work that way, right? You have to you have to work on the messaging. But what I was going to say is that it's not just about the launch; it's actually about the landing, right? And so we have a whole team that sits within product marketing called like the landings team. And before every launch, they're like, "Hey, what are going to be the metrics? Is it from awareness, as Ursula was saying? Is it the messaging pull through? Is it the coverage? Or like what's 30 days, 60 days, 90 days pattern of like usage?"
Okay. I mean, that's really interesting in terms of like transition. So another question that I had was, again, like as I said at the beginning, product marketing is usually not a really gold KPI-oriented team because most people see it as content generation or positioning messaging. As we talked a bit now, there's actually KPI involved with like launches. So what are the KPIs, or how do you kind of like gold a product marketing team? Maybe Ashta, you have a large team, so how do you manage that?
Yeah, so I think we're very particular about making sure that we have measurable success tied to our product launches and execution. So, I'm of the belief that the product marketeer is an expert on the product and the market, and that's why they're developing the positioning, the messaging, and that ends up getting used by both sales and the rest of the marketing organization. And that's the reason why they have almost like this obligation to own the business metrics like pipeline generation. Okay. If you are feeding that content into campaigns, into digital programs, etc., you need to go on that number. So my team does that. We have ownership of those numbers directly, alongside, of course, our campaigns and digital team. And then on the product side, when we're launching new products, etc., my team is also responsible for making sure that the product launch is successful, which again, like depending on the launch, the metrics can be different, but typically they are around product usage, etc. So we have very, very measurable KPIs, if you will. Yeah.
Like Google is famous for using OKRs. Like what does a OKRs of product marketing looks like?
Yeah, so very similar as what Ashma was saying is that I think back to the construct of like launches and landings, right? So I think let's pick on landings. I think, for example, one product that my team just launched is a product called App Maker, which is a low-code development platform that's built on the G Suite infrastructure. Here we're looking at adoption, from number of customers, number of domains, number of apps created, right? Like so, as a developer product, it's mostly going to be adoption based. We do look at the pipeline in terms of influence deals. The way the product is packaged is that it's included in business and enterprise versions of G Suite. So, but what I have been tracking of is, for example, the number of signups from the G Suite signup page, for the overall product, which includes Gmail, Sheets, Slides, and App Maker is already, among the top influencers of signups in the top 10. So. Without going into numbers, of course, but so that's something where nobody really thought to ask that question, but as a product marketer, it's really good because then that just if anything, it helps you influence decisions on if the web page gets restructured. What are the things that we want to put out there, and obviously it looks like people are interested in this product. So yeah.
Ursula, anything else to add?
Yeah, one of the big things I find when you're doing product launches, especially with startups, they always offer you an opportunity to bump your revenue up because you're getting your entire company and your team, your product team, your marketing team, and your sales team aligned on one vision and one timeline. So a lot of great things can happen if you have an end date that's very specific and everyone has to meet that goal. And I found when I was working at Pantheon and with these startups, when everyone gathers around a product launch and a product launch date, you actually get to see a really nice bump in pipeline and revenue. So if you're struggling with getting to the right pipeline or the sales numbers, find an opportunity to create a product launch because it's a really great way to package all of your features that you're sending out every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks or every 4 weeks in a more meaningful way that then helps the customer really understand what your product is and what your position is in the marketplace.
Okay, that's good. Let's talk about the relationship with the rest of the organization. So you mentioned sales enablement. How does PMM, the PMM function, interact with sales? Sales enablement is definitely. I've seen sales enablement being part of PMM. I've seen sales enablement being his own team reporting to the VP sales. What's your experience with that?
Yeah, I think product marketing is unique in the sense that, I almost think that product marketing sits in between sales and product, right? So if I think about the two most important stakeholders in the organization, those are the two organizations and teams that we work with a ton. Product, of course, because, we want to make sure that because of our knowledge of the product and the market, we want to influence the product roadmap, the product strategy, work with them on pricing, packaging, and sort of like, other more strategic things that are tied to the overall product strategy. And then sales, because if you're responsible for product messaging and positioning, et cetera, you want to make sure that the messages that marketing is sending out in the market are consistent with the messages sales are going to be relaying to their prospects and customers. And they have to be consistent and compelling both. So sales enablement positioning is very different from obviously what you tell to the customer and prospect. So there are a variety of things that go into it, which are obviously how to sell the product, but also how to tell the story, and then also skills development, right? Because we hire salespeople from a variety of different backgrounds with a variety of different experiences, and you just have to sort of like nurture in their skill sets too. So for me, I think the way that it worked out at Zendesk was that product marketing and sales enablement were working so well close together. It made sense that the two organizations sort of like merged and started working together. So I say sales enablement, but it's actually sales and partner enablement, both. But I feel that by collaborating so closely, by being a part of the same team, it really helps boost the efficiency, and it also sort of like influences and informs the priorities for both the teams. So that's working beautifully for us.
Ursula, like in startup world, like who usually own like sales enablement? Is like the salespeople like owning it themselves, or is it like someone else pushing it?
I think it's a combination of both. I think whoever has a bit more bandwidth usually takes ownership of it, but typically it's marketing and sales collaborating together and just really coming up with a very short list of deliverables that the sales team needs to be super successful.
When you say deliverable, like what kind of deliverable?
The deliverables could be like a sales deck. It could be the demo. It could be the demo script. It could be sales scripts. It could also be like the competitive story. So how do you compete with this new product offering? How do you then compete with the competitors? What are those messages? How do you rebut them? You've got this thing called the competitive battle card and things like that. And then the customer stories, I think, are really critical as well. So how do you tell the new product offering through the eyes of the customer? So those are really important tactics or deliverables that I think you can't launch. You need those before you can launch a product.
Yeah. So much of what product marketing does, I feel, is it's a lot of people think of like that big ticket messaging, the billboards, the branding, the messaging, but especially in the enterprise, it's all about that field enablement, right? So when we have launches at Google, like there's this term that we call like the bill of materials that that's attached to every launch. And there, that's where you work hand in hand with the product organization, sales, and be like, hey, do you want battle cards? Do you want a sales deck? And those are all things. It's not the glossy stuff that you're going to see on a billboard, but it's the stuff that literally the field is going to carry with them, and that's where like the real kind of battle happens. So that's extremely important from a sales enablement standpoint, and like having some kind of agreement on like the bill of materials and the scope also sets you up for success, because you as product marketing, you can like own like you can quarterback the production of all those assets. You don't have to do all of it yourself, but at least you agree on what's going to be as part of the envelope. And I would say that also accompanies with like how much of the tiering that launch is going to be.
You mentioned Billboard, like we are in Billboard City for tech product. Like what's your take on billboards?
When I worked at Salesforce, we had a billboard for recruiting. We had just launched a new campaign around welcome to your dream job, hashtag dream job. Remember that? And so a billboard made sense because we needed to hire sales reps, and it was such a competitive market for hiring. So we wanted to shift people's mindset that Salesforce was a sexy company and we were hiring sales reps. So it just really depends on what your objective is. For us, it was around awareness.
Yeah, and I think that should be the objective with a billboard. Like you can't expect anything more than awareness. If you can just sort of like measure the recall, the brand recall from there, that should serve you really well. I mean, there are a lot of success stories out there. Box, for example, had its billboard that caught everyone's attention when they compared themselves to SharePoint.
SharePoint sucks.
Exactly. So you just have to have a very.
I remember that one.
Yeah, I think you just have to have very provocative and very succinct and concise messaging. Your point should not be to tell your entire story and like what the company does and how everyone in the company is working, but it should be just really about making a strong statement right? And I think that those are the ones that are really, really successful. If you look at Apple Box, the example that I gave, you'll see a couple of new billboards popping up because of Dreamforce this week. They're very provocative, right? And I think that's when they catch your attention. I've seen billboards that I really don't want to look at when I'm driving, even if I have the time, because there's just too much going on a small real estate.
Yeah, it has to be really succinct, and I think there's one. I do have one box story. So so that space where we had the SharePoint sucks billboard. Sorry if anybody uses SharePoint or affiliated with it, but that's a space that as a company also you rent it out like months in advance, and it is actually pretty expensive. I think it's like in the thousands of double-digit thousands of dollars right at a time. And but we had inventory at one point when we launched this one cloud ecosystem that I was talking about, where we had a spot at saying, okay, hey, for the next 3 months, we can do something there. And we didn't have any major campaign. So we actually used that as like a rallying cry for the one cloud ecosystem, where we told all these partners who were integrating with us, we kind of dangled this carrot being like, if you integrate in time for this announcement, you will be one of the logos on our billboard. And
That's
so
good.
we had this amazing billboard, was amazing. I think it was
You
amazing.
thought
but
it was amazing.
I thought it was amazing. but
Although with all
good
those
job.
logos, nobody could see any of those
well,
logos,
no,
but
that's
hey.
good. No, well, you'll be surprised. But what was amazing about that, the outcome is like, so, we were all enthralled with the idea, but what ended up happening, which was great, was that the partners came back to us, and like some of them stopped on the highway to take pictures, and then the investors were driving, and they said, hey, why is, Breezy's logos on the box thing? That's awesome, So it was just one of those things where you took advantage of not just your awareness, but you created like an umbrella for awareness for others as well.
Good.
And that was like almost like, the equivalent of like the bat signal in like Gotham City or something, right? Being like, hey, this is what we stand for. So it can be pretty powerful that way too.
I used to joke with my team at my days at Citrix and even afterwards, like, you should indulge in a little OPM, which means other people's money and brand. So, I think, partnerships from that perspective can really help boost the brand awareness. And, there are, again, many cool stories out there that help validate that.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you for that. It's time to open up the floor for questions.
I'm happy to take that first, and I'm sure you guys have input there too. So for me, I run a team of almost 42 people now, so I've got a large team. And the way that I've started structuring my team, and you're right, absolutely right, that in the beginning it's all about like, you've got a few people and, they're jack of all trades, they're trying to do as many things as possible, then you start getting specialized. And a lot of people tend to specialize in terms of the product lines that they own. I have a different approach. I think it's best to structure in terms of like how your customers are purchasing the product, right? So if you orient your teams around certain solutions, initiatives that the customers are taking, I think, that'll serve you well. And that also gives you agility and like, the fluidity you need as, the strategy of the company evolves as you scale, to restructure the team, again, based on, how customers are purchasing from you. So that's the way that I've structured my team.
I think it's your metrics change, obviously. So that's the first thing you think about is, okay, so this product is now created for upsell, which you've got your existing customers, so it's a great strategy to do so. It really doesn't change, actually. It's just the mindset shifts because your metrics just are shifting to say upsell, and I think it becomes more of an account management. So you're, rather than arming the sales team, or you can be arming the sales team, you're also arming your account management team to sell more.
I think one thing that changes is tactically, there might be some core product marketing disciplines that you can take to task to do that, right? So to me, pricing and packaging comes to mind, right? Like, as you may want to think about, if my goal now as an organization is to upsell, are my things packaged in the right way, right? Like, you obviously, if you were in the process of like just focused on conversions and net new customers, you probably were not thinking about like pricing and segmentation as a way to kind of like foster that upsell opportunity. So I would say, you may want to go back and really think about, are my things packaged in the right way, and am I talking about them in the right way? That would be, at least one thing that comes to mind.
Yeah, I think in addition to that, your go-to-market execution changes, right? The teams that are involved in selling, that drastically changes. So I can tell you, like, in organizations where you have a new product launch, brand new product launch, or you're just existing products that you're trying to sell to new customers, you tend to leverage your SDR teams, et cetera. And then, like, when you're upselling, you have to focus on, what the value propositions are for existing customers and how you engage the account teams more. So I think from an enablement perspective, the focus changes on, how do we tell a compelling story to existing customers, and, what additional value are we really providing for them?
and also the success organization. So customer success then can also be that the pool that also enables the upsell as well.
In a nutshell, the short answer is a lot. Because I think what I do want to do here is like give due credit to our creative team. I think we have a super strong creative team. You know, we can have the best messages and we can create the best content out there, but the delivery, the way, you know, it comes to life in pictures and videos, etc., that is our, like, you know, masterminds and the creative team who do a fabulous job. So to me, it's a partnership, and I think you know, partnership from the ground up, meaning whenever we've had a new project or whenever we've had like branding or even messaging refresh, we did last year too. In addition to the videos and stuff, like we up-leveled our messaging. If you remember the tagline, for those of you who keep a track of Zendesk, you know, relationships are complicated used to be our tagline years ago. And, you know, it had a meaning because we play in the CRM space and it was all about maintaining great relationships with your customers, et cetera. But as the company evolved and we started selling more and more upmarket to enterprise customers, we started thinking differently about, you know, how do we go about and, you know, make more than just a statement, right? How do we tell companies what we can help them do? So when we went through the refresh last year, product marketing took the lead on doing a bunch of surveys, because I'm a big believer that, you know, with messaging, for those of you who are in marketing and product marketing or brand, you know, everyone has an opinion on it, right? And you can't really compete, or you can't really, you know, just discuss opinions rationally. So I'm a firm believer in backing things up with data. And we did qualitative, quantitative surveys, both internally with our employees and then, of course, with our customers as well. And the result was that beautiful partnership that I talked about with the creative team. And now, you know, we've up-leveled our messaging as well. And if you go to our website, you'll now, instead of relationships are complicated, you'll see, you know, we help companies become the companies that customers want them to be, right? So it's beautiful, it's simple, very close to our ethos. It's like, you know, become the company your customers want you to be. It has a powerful meaning to it. And that also tells you that, you know, we're here to help you with that. And the subtag there is like, you know, the best experiences are built with Zendesk. We remain a company that is averse to buzzwords and fluff and all that stuff. We speak in simple terms that people can understand, because again, we think that we're marketing to people and not necessarily brick and mortar, you know, companies, if you will.
The relationship between product managers and product marketing, I think, to me, are really important. You know, I think if you're a product marketer and you don't talk to product, there's something wrong, right? So I don't know if this is still the case, but when I was at Salesforce, you know, we overlapped. Product was in a different building, right? And then, you know, we would get some of the messaging strands and all the way from like Mark Benioff, who famously is very prescient and like kind of knows exactly how he wants to steer the company. But to me, it's an essential partnership. It's almost like, you know, like the rapper and the DJ, right? I think to me, engineering and product figure out like what the plot is of like what you're going to be doing, and then product marketing can help you build a narrative, right? So plot, narrative. So I think the partnership there is really important. And to your question specifically, you know, I think when you specifically, if you remember, I was talking about alphas, betas, and GAs, like in the interim period where you're testing the product with a small amount of customers, that's when you really got to be in sync and like keep your ear on the ground as a product marketer to listen to what people are saying about the product, because all of a sudden something that might have been like voted a priority in prioritization for product, people are like, and they're like, well, we want to build this because this is cool. And people are like, well, no, but people need this because they can't get anything done if you don't have this, right? Your job as a product marketer in particular is to be more attentive to those kind of things, because I think you can parse what the customer is going to say, as opposed to what engineering might be hell-bent on wanting to build and deliver. It's not always the case, but I think to me that's where the partnership works really well. And I would go back to the analogy of like, you know, plot narrative, you know, rapper and DJ. Like I think it's a very strong and powerful.
Also, product marketing should always be on sales calls and really speaking to the customers. So all of a sudden you have customer product marketing to product. So you've got all of that information that really connects nicely with product marketing being right in the center of that.
Yeah, I think my team contributes or represents the voice of the customer. We run the market strategy and competitive team as well. So for us, gathering information on win-loss, gathering information on churn, regularly keeping in touch with our customers helps us sort of like build that credibility with the product team. And again, like, you know, I don't really care much about the organizational structures. I think you have to look beyond the silos. I've been part of product marketing teams that were wrapped under the product teams, and then here that's not the case. We are under the marketing team. But to me, that partnership is absolutely critical. But then that relationship is only meaningful when you're doing your part in really understanding your customers better, and you need to own that as a marketer, as a product marketer. When you start talking to customers as frequently that they do.
Invite yourself to the meetings.
Yeah, I think
flag,
that's absolutely important. Like I said, I think just split up the work, product and marketing, and it's about being an expert on the product and the market basically is a representation of your prospects and customers, right? So getting a strong hold of that is important to build that credibility, and there's no other way. There's no shortcut.
I would also add on that the best way to win the heart of a sales team is if you train them properly how to push their product and you enable them to sell more, usually that brings a lot of credibility and they will love you for it. So that's also a great way to show them that you can support them.
I think listening is important. Just listen to customers, both internally and externally. So one of the things that we did differently with the sales enablement team when I inherited it back in January of this year, I guess, was apply that same customer journey mindset that we apply to our clients that are paying us, right? So when you think about sales enablement, you have to treat them as your internal clients and listen to their needs. What are they struggling with? And that comes by not only just being a part of the conversation with them, but then being with them in their situations, meaning customer calls and sort of just keeping direct touch with the customer. I think that that really does help.
I have one final question for the panel. Hopefully, if you're not convinced that you need to hire product marketing, you should be convinced by now that you're leaving a lot of money on the table and lots of great features for your roadmap. So if you were giving an advice to hiring the first product marketing in your founder to hire the first product marketing person, what would be the thing to look for in in those candidates?
I would say how well they can tell the story and how well they can get the leadership team aligned to kind of work with them on creating a consistent and cohesive messaging manifesto.
Yeah. And go for it.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think we were talking about earlier about minimum viable positioning, right? I think you need somebody who can come on the ground and help ask those questions, determine, we were talking before this panel about how so many of the conversations sometimes we have with early stage founders are, you realize that they are not even in sync of what they're building and why until you start probing around, hey, what's your messaging, what's your narrative? So I think somebody who can help that narrative, I think to me it kind of goes hand in hand with the platform that you're building. To me, a good platform is a good story, but a good story is also a good platform.
Okay. Ashta, anything else you want to?
I think I echo the storytelling part, but it's also important to keep in mind that the answer to the next set of requirements is not going to be consistent, right? So that depends on what the company's doing, what kind of market is it operating in, is it highly competitive, and the goal is first to get some brand awareness and then sort of move towards more differentiation. So I think those factors definitely play in.
Yep.
But yeah, storytelling, that's just key.
Okay.
All right, thank you.